Studios are always the strangest places. Either nothing is happening and there's boredom, or there's 5 seconds and...
Okay, we're rolling.
Hello, I'm Tom Goodale. I'm here to interview Dr. Geoffrey Godbey of the Pennsylvania State University as part of the Legends in Parks and Recreation series sponsored by the Academy of Park and Recreation Administration. Dr. Godbey, let me start by asking you a bit about your pre-professional history, including your family history, and follow that with a bit of how you became interested in the field of parks and recreation.
Tom, I was the eldest of 4, and at a very early age I was interested in my own leisure. I was interested in play and sport and wanted to be doing things, and was on playgrounds pretty early, and joined the YMCA and hung out after school playing ping pong. And my father was in education, and my mother was involved not only in raising 4 kids, but was extremely, as they say, active in the community. And she really was active in the community and knew a lot about the community, which I think, you know, most good park and recreation people do. And so I gravitated toward higher education, probably because of my dad, who got a PhD from Harvard and then went into university work, as they say, and for my mom, who was always connected organically to, to the community. We moved around a lot, kind of academic brats, and I was a good student when I was interested and a bad student when I wasn't, and had a good life prior to getting involved in this field, and one in which I could explore a lot of things in unstructured play in a way that I don't think a lot of kids can today. But I think I had a privileged upbringing. I had 2 parents that cared about me.
When you began college, did you begin in Parks and Recreation, or did you discover that after your freshman year?
Well, my background may be similar to yours in that I began college at the ripe old age of 17 with no idea of why I was there, except it was expected of me. I chose economics as a major, and I have no idea why, except that I was given a form and was asked to check a major. I think I was always intellectually curious, but going to the University of Delaware at 17 was a mistake, and I got expelled from the university not only for failing biology, which coincided with a TV show I liked on Saturday morning, Soupy Sales, but also for an altercation with a reserve officer training corps sergeant. And at that point, my parents wisely said, okay, now why don't you get out and work, and why don't you support yourself a little bit. This was a different era, as you know. And I worked in a clothing store, I worked doing a lot of different things, but by chance I got a job on a playground for a municipal recreation department in Delaware, and that initially got me interested.
I know that you wound up at SUNY Cortland,
Yeah.
because that's also my alma mater. And I know that you studied with Gold Metcalf.
Yeah.
And I know that there are a number of other people besides your dad that were influential in your career. But tell us something about Metcalf, maybe, and Cortland, and also the other influences.
Yeah. When I worked in municipal recreation, first as a playground director and then as a supervisor, first I loved it because it was of obvious importance. A lot of kids in a working class areas really spent all summer on that playground. It was not just scheduled sport. They hung out there. They knew you knew them, you knew their parents. Their parents said, if Donnie gets in trouble, let me know. Mm-hmm. We had evening functions in which people brought warm Kool-Aid and bologna sandwiches, and it was community organization, and it was a kind of social work, and I loved it. It was it seemed of obvious importance. So the people who worked for that Newark, Delaware's Recreation Park Department, Stan Francis, Glenn Smoot, Kitty Hall, all thought that I might have some interest in this area, and said, you know, there's a place where you can go and study to become a recreation park professional. And I was dumbfounded. Come on, that can't be. But they said, well, look, let us contact this school in New York, which was State University of New York College at Cortland at the time. And I went to visit with my parents' approval and met a man named Metcalf, who you studied with as well. And he was someone who immediately made you think you were important, and immediately believed in your capabilities. He found out a lot about me. He made a case to the administration I should be admitted, although I was certainly not a spectacular student given my first go-round. But he had a kind of genuine faith in you that an 18-year-old can tell if they're being led on or not. And I knew that this guy thought I could make something of myself. And I was working in a clothing store, playing drums in a rock band, and feeling my way, writing bad poetry, and kind of feeling my way in life. And this guy said, I think you could be good at this. I will go out of my way. He didn't say it in those terms, but he made it clear he would go out of his way to help. He got me into Cortland, and off I went.
Did you go straight into graduate work, or did you go back to the field?
I married Bonnie Gaines when she was 19 and I was 20. We moved to Cortland together, and we worked at a place called the George Junior Republic, which was a residential center and school for juvenile delinquents. And I did recreation programming and supervision, and we were both, at our young ages, were house parents to juvenile delinquents. We saw a lot of bad stuff happen, but it was an invaluable experience in terms of seeing what kids are up against and trying to grow up. And when I graduated from Cortland, we then went to Boothbay Harbor, Maine, and I taught tennis and ran a very different kind of recreation center for wealthy people, and ate a lot of lobster, and kind of had two opposite experiences.
You've spent the better part of your professional life at Penn State University. I understand that you got your doctorate also at Penn State University, master's as well?
Yeah, I did my master's and doctorate at Penn State. During that time, I was very interested in urban recreation, and I got an opportunity to work for Philadelphia's Department of Recreation, which at the time may have been the best, or certainly among the best, urban departments in the country. And Bob Crawford, who was a legend,
Right.
in this field, took an interest in me, and I was dumbfounded that he would do that. And he would frequently go like this, come here into the office, and explain, now here's what's going on in this rec center, and here's why this is happening, and you take a city car and go out there. And he spent a lot of time with me. And so I had I'm a small town guy, and this was my first kind of experience with a big city, and it was very useful. You found out all kinds of things that you didn't know before, such as police don't always answer calls in some parts of the city, or that lots of young people live in apartments that are continuously robbed to the point where they don't put any furniture in the apartment because they know it's going to get robbed. And so this was real good seasoning, because I had led a privileged small town life, so both the masterate and doctoral degree at Penn State, I involved Philadelphia's department and did my doctoral dissertation really looking at a system of advisory councils they had, which was a unique I thought, a unique system. So I kept some link to Philly's department while I was going to Penn State.
You have obviously found what we call attachment to a place in State College. You've spent almost all of your career as a professor at State College at a time when most people move around, and move around quite a bit. What is it, either about you and your sense of roots or about State College, that has such an obvious attraction?
Well, I did, prior to going to Penn State to teach, I spent 3 years at a branch campus of Penn State in the Philadelphia area. And as you know, because you visited, the focus there was training inner city kids in an associate degree program, and I very much wrapped up with interest in race issues and urban issues, and went from there to the University of Waterloo for a couple of years in Canada, which was a very different situation, in which it really exposed me to leisure studies as opposed to recreation and park management. And at Waterloo I met Stan Parker, and we wrote a book, and I had a lot of good experiences. But I love State College, and I love it because the terrain, you know, is just, I relate to it. I don't know how better to say it. It's, sometimes you say, you know, someone is they live in a given area, and other times you say they're of that area, you know, and I'm of that area. It is hills and valleys, it's 4 seasons, you can escape from humans fairly easily, and again, you know, from being there, it's kind of English countryside, and I like the alternation of seasons and living in seasons, and the university is a place that I think the good outweighs the bad. You know, it's becoming more corporate, as all universities are, but I never had a boss. You know, I was given freedom. The university has treated me very well, and my hope is I've treated it well. That's my hope. But it has treated me extremely well. It's also given me the opportunity to travel in a whole bunch of countries and go all over and never have to fill out a bunch of papers saying, we don't trust you to go away for a few days. And so I'm pretty rooted.
Clearly are. Jeff, you mentioned that at Waterloo meeting Stan Parker, and I remember the Godbey and Parker book, the first of a number of books. But rather than recite all of them, let me ask you what, in your own view, are your principal accomplishments and perhaps the major contributions to the field?
Principal accomplishments are probably hanging out with the right people. I've been interested, as a lot of other people are, in things that are interdisciplinary. Like you, were I not a professor in recreation parks or leisure studies, I would be a professor in something else. I like academic life. And in my own work, I've tried to cross lines or cross boundaries with sociology or with demography or with whoever, you know, to broaden the scope of inquiry. And what I'm interested in, I would say, you know, I'd say I'm wide but not deep in terms of my interests. And I like to write. You know, I write naturally, and so I would say an interdisciplinary perspective. Sometimes I have worried that people academically in recreation parks can get a little bit insulated or a little bit withdrawn from the university. And like you, I feel very much at home in the university, and I want to, interact with as broad a cross-section of people as I can.
That I know some of your graduate students, current and past, and I know that has been transferred to them pretty effectively. Has it been as effective in working with undergraduate students and with people in the field? Has it helped to broaden them as well?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that a lot of people who work in public recreation parks, I think, have been pushed so much into kind of a professional model, a narrow, standalone professional model, that when you begin talking with them broadly, there's a real hunger for it. And in some cases, they recognize that what they're doing is kind of inherently interdisciplinary, because they're working at their best. They're working with everyone in the community or the county or every aspect of the forest they're managing or everybody in the hospital. And so in some cases, I think what I'm doing in giving talks and things is triggering what they already know, to say, of course the world is broader than our field, and of course at our best we relate to everyone. So I think there's a real hunger for that, because I think in a lot of universities we have preached such a narrow notion of professionalism, mm-hmm. that a lot of people who work in the field recognize that's not how it is. You do what needs to be done, and you don't say, is this within my narrow definition, mm-hmm. Of the profession? If this is a helping field.
Yeah, I know also that you have spent a good deal of time and energy understanding and then trying to communicate to people in our profession and in our universities some of the things that are on the horizon. You talk a lot about the future, you talk a lot about change, and try to get people to anticipate some of the kinds of things that are going to be shaping their programs, their agencies, and so on. The question that I would have is to go back a little bit to your days at George Junior Republic, and from there to the present. What are the principal changes that you've observed in the park and recreation field? Perhaps mostly in the field of application and practice, but also perhaps the university.
I think, at the local level, there's been some shift from either a community development model or social change model from the 40s, 50s, 60s, actually from the 1800s, to a marketing model. And in many ways, I think that's been destructive. The people I knew in municipal recreation, and many still would know a broad cross-section of the people in their community, and they would know something about their daily lives. They would know there's a problem over here, this kid is getting beat up by his old man every night, or this is happening in this neighborhood, and this is happening wherever. And in effect, they were kind of, the Canadians call it social animation. They were identifying with their constituency what were the problems that affected their everyday life and trying to do something about them. And I think many of these services have been pushed so much toward marketing models that you serve who, you serve who has the money, and you serve who can pay for services and who wants them. Classically, the rational recreation movements of Europe served people who didn't always want their services. But, as a very bright guy in Brazil who was a leader in recreation parks in Brazil said to me, we must offer people not only what they want, but what they can learn to want. And what they can learn to want may be very different than what they want mm-hmm. right now. And mm-hmm. the problem I see right now is much of what's offered is what people want, but not what they can learn to want.
Does that have some impact then on the way colleges and universities in their undergraduate and often graduate programs as well prepare people for the professional field? How has that changed? Are the needs today different? Should they accommodate what you're talking about and serving those things that are wanted, or should we be teaching them what to want?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I think it's situational. I wouldn't want to give a categorical answer. I'm at a university in which we're in with hotel and restaurant faculty, and they're market driven. If you run a restaurant, you don't come out and tell people you shouldn't eat a lot of sugar, or, you know, because they'll say, I'm paying for this, and the customer is always right. So in a program like ours, marketing model is, you know, is all important. And of course, historically in this field, John Crompton and several other people have been influential in interpreting the marketing model to our students. The problem is, I think, the marketing model ignores a broad cross-section of the emergent have-not culture. And in this country, the have-not culture is not so much, you know, in Marxian terms, kind of being dominated by those who are in the information culture. They're simply being ignored because they don't have any use, you know, in an information economy. And there's huge questions of not only employment, but the creation of meaning. And so I don't think we'll go, quote, back to our roots, because I don't think the past comes back. But I think there will be concern for problem solving and dealing with problems of poverty, which I don't think our curriculums address. We're very interested right now in what might be called disparagingly kind of politically correct issues. But problems of poverty, when all is said and done, I don't think our curriculums kind of effectively pay attention to as they should.
What do you think would be the skills of a person who would be ideally suited to move into entry-level jobs, but then move quickly through supervisory and management jobs in our field? I mean, what kind of skills should someone bring to the modern Park and Recreation Department?
I would love to hear you answer that question. I think all of us who have been in this field for a while believe that successful practitioners, in some way you can identify them outside of any academic milieu, that they have an orientation. One of the things that characterizes them, I think, is they're capable of listening, which I don't think most people are. Mm-hmm. And I think they also have a genuine interest in other people, which is also exceedingly rare. You know, past that, the skills that, past those orientations, the skills now seem to me that they are traditional managerial skills. They are informational skills, which is something we do a bad job with in public recreation parks. The information revolution, to some extent, is passing this field by. So the classic information about information or knowledge about knowledge, I think, is critical. Also, we know we do precious little in preparing students in terms of environmental knowledge. Our students don't know anything about trees, for example, you know, let alone ecosystems. And in many other countries, as you know, in Europe, Australia, New Zealand in particular, the park manager would be a horticulturalist and would know a lot about trees and flowers and shrubs and grass and ecosystems. And so those are a few things that come to mind.
If we were to talk about not only the needs that employees and agencies would have in terms of employees in the future, but what do you see as the future of public park and recreation programs? They've gone through great changes. What do you foresee?
This may sound funny, but I'm very interested in some research that a couple of doctoral students I work with are doing in one grant we recently got. The world's being repopulated, and the world's being repopulated primarily by a few Asian countries and several Latin American or Hispanic cultures. And what they think recreation is and what they think parks are is going to be critically important. And they have different thoughts from us. And the world we know is disappearing because not only because of the revolution in every aspect of life, but because of the repopulation of the world. I've been recently reading the work of a guy named Lin Yutang, who has been a kind of interpreter of Chinese culture to Anglos, because he writes about leisure, among other things. And the Chinese are right now producing the most people. And as you know, as the world is repopulated, since 90-some% of all the people being born are in these countries, recreation, parks, and leisure is going to mean something different. Past that, I'm very interested in the fact that, as a marketing guy said last week at a session I heard, look, basically there aren't neighborhoods except for a few ethnic conclaves. You know, if we are a neighborhood-oriented, geographic community oriented field, and geographic communities mean less and less, and neighborhoods mean less and less, how do we reorganize the way we think so that we customize our services? And you know, the mass customization of time is occurring, the mass customization of products is occurring. We're used to sending everyone the same flyer. You know, how do we customize what we do to people who have different values and lead different lives?
A couple of things come to mind from what you've just said. One is that people are getting tired of things that are really big, including, as you mentioned, really big stores, but also really big cities. And much of the migration that we're seeing is towards smaller towns. Is that to try to recapture some sense of neighborhood and some sense of community?
I think it is. But as the Eagles say, you know, call someplace paradise, kiss it goodbye. And I mean, the cycles of growth are so fast that the stability of some communities that existed in the first half of the century, not economic stability necessarily, but geographic, you know, just staying put, seems to me like it's disappearing so fast. I think sense of place is increasingly important to people. But you know, and obviously the recreation and leisure components of where they go are increasingly important. This is a field with a healthy future. One is because the world's urbanizing at a stunning rate. And urbanization and industrialization historically is why there are recreation park services in the public sector. So, you know, I think the future of this field is healthy. Whether the future of our little curriculums is healthy is a different issue, and it's honestly one I don't care so much about, because the subject matter interests me more than the configuration of departments or bureaus of government.
You mentioned at the outset that if you were not a professor of parks and recreation, you would be a professor of something. And clearly the academy is of significance to you. So let me ask the final question. And that is, you're a person who is driven by principle, and principle based on philosophy. And so let me ask you finally, in concluding this interview, what are the philosophical foundations of the career that you've put together at this point?
I mean, early on, I was, I've always been interested in freedom, you know, and any person in Western culture, or no, lots of people aren't interested in freedom. I was always interested in being free. I was always interested in being free and exploring where I wanted to explore, and not having a lot of people say, don't do this. I was always interested in the philosophical question of what would you do without, you know, with a minimum of constraints. That always seemed a critical question to me, and one that interested me, and as it interests you, and was part of the reasons we got in this field. Given a minimum of constraints, what is worth doing? What I believe in later life, much more than I did in earlier life, is I used to assume the term discipline was essentially negative and militaristic. And I now think that without discipline, there's no meaningful leisure. It's not a very important concept or term. So that may reflect, later life. But I am very interested in people who can be self-limiting and who can discipline, and then within that framework of self-limitation, find meaning. If you find meaning, you get pleasure. So that would be a simple answer.
It's not a simple answer at all. Obviously, it puts you squarely into the lap of ethics because you're dealing with choice and because freedom is valued. Let me ask you finally to follow up a philosophy of public ethics or government ethics, if you will, because I know much of your own practice has been in public recreation.
I think that the simple term public servant, which no one, I won't say no one takes seriously, but I think the term public servant is actually an appropriate one. Now, it doesn't mean some servants can be really well paid. It doesn't mean to me that you are sacrificial and are willing to work for nothing or to be abused, but the notion that you serve, Dorothy Indiris, who was a leader in the field and in the city of Milwaukee, said that the best people in this field were ones for whom the public was holy. And I don't think I can improve on that.
Is there a higher calling than public service?
That's an interesting question, and the question suggests the answer, which doesn't surprise me. This is a culture that right now doesn't know anything to do but make a lot of money, it seems to me. And I don't think it's making many people happy. And so I'm waiting for the next 10-year period to produce a huge return to wanting to serve, to wanting to help, to wanting to improve the lives of others for altruistic reasons, and also for the very pragmatic reasons, is it seems to make the doer happy.
And to make sense for all of us. That's a good place, I think, Jeff, to end the interview. And on behalf of the American Academy of Park and Recreation Administration, I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks for doing this, Tom.